Why did he wait so long before speaking? She couldn't stop asking herself that question. His silence had stretched across the entire briefing room like a shadow, swallowing words, smothering certainty. And then, with one sharp command, he shattered it. A single sentence that cut through the air and through her chest. She wanted to challenge him, to question why now, why this way. But the words never came. His sudden authority pinned her where she sat. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was something else. A mix of defiance, shame, and that strange pulse of adrenaline she had lived with for years. Her name was Elena Ward, 29 years old, Army call sign Falcon 3. Somewhere between combat pilot, marksman, and shadow operative. But that didn't matter here. What mattered was the silence she'd grown used to. The silence of a man she had once trusted. And now, in this dimly lit room filled with maps, screens, and weary soldiers, that silence had been broken by action. She leaned back in her chair. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. Papers rustled as others shifted uncomfortably. A low hum from the projector filled the space where his voice had ended. No one moved. Elena's eyes traced the scarred oak table. Every scratch, every burn mark, every dent felt like a ghost. The ghosts of missions past, soldiers who never returned, words never spoken. She swallowed. Why had his command struck her so deeply? Because it wasn't just tactical, it was personal. But no one else knew that, not yet. Outside, the base groaned under the weight of routine. Helicopters churned the sky. Radios crackled with clipped voices. The sun pressed down heavy on the dust. Soldiers hurried from hangar to truck, their boots thudding rhythmically. To anyone watching, it was just another day. But to Elena, it was the edge of something darker. She had been here before. That sharp taste of anticipation. The gnawing conflict in her gut. The sense that this mission, whatever shape it took, would reach deeper into her than she was ready for. Her hand brushed the pocket of her fatigues. Inside, folded twice over, was a letter, not military issue, not for briefing. A letter she hadn't had the courage to open. Her brother's handwriting on the envelope. She had carried it for 3 weeks. It had followed her from safe house to outpost, from cockpit to bunk. She couldn't read it. Not yet. Not with the weight it promised. The commander's voice finally broke through again. Operation Eclipse begins in 48 hours. Short cold final. The soldiers around the table nodded. A few scribbled notes. Others stared at nothing. Elena didn't move. She wanted to ask why she was chosen. Why her unit? Why now? But the question burned inside her throat and never left, because she already knew the answer. He didn't trust her silence anymore. He wanted obedience. And yet beneath that, something unspoken hung between them. Something only the two of them carried. When the briefing ended, the others filed out with that restless energy soldiers carry before deployment, not joy, not dread, but something between. A few whispered to each other. A nervous laugh broke and died quickly. Boots dragged. The hum of voices scattered. Elena lingered, her hands flat on the table. She studied the maps left behind. Circles, lines, codes that meant little to the untrained eye but felt heavy to her. She traced one red circle with her fingertip, a location marked Zone 7. She froze. She knew that terrain too well. It was where her brother had last been seen. Her chest tightened. She stepped back, pressing her hands against her hips, trying to steady her breath. No one knew she recognized it. No one but her. And that secret both drove her forward and chained her in fear. Later that night, when the room had emptied and the fluorescent lights buzzed lonely overhead, Elena sat alone. Her rifle leaned against the wall. Her helmet rested on the desk. She pressed her palms against her temples, listening. The silence was louder than any gunfire she'd ever faced. Her mind drifted back to the desert wind against her face, the sharp sting of sand in her eyes, her brother's voice echoing in memory. "Don't come looking for me, Lena. Promise me." She hadn't promised, she couldn't. Because her brother had disappeared 2 years ago, pulled into the underworld of shifting borders and whispered deals. Some said he defected. Others said he was taken. No one had proof, only rumors. And in the silence of rumor, she had built her own private war. That was why she had joined this mission. Not the flag, not the medals, not the orders. But him. Always him. The next morning, the base came alive before dawn. Soldiers shuffled out with steaming cups, breath rising in the cold air. Engines roared to life. The metallic smell of oil and fuel clung to everything. Elena tightened the strap of her vest, checked her sidearm, ran her hand across the smooth barrel of her rifle. Her eyes narrowed as she caught her reflection in the hangar glass. Dust streaked across her cheek. Her hair pulled back tight, but it wasn't the image that unsettled her. It was the eyes, tired, searching. And then behind her reflection, movement. The commander. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, studying her like she was both soldier and stranger. His silence pressed against her chest again. And then, just as she braced for another command, he said something unexpected. "You think I don't see it?" Her heart froze. "See what?" she asked carefully. "The way you hesitate before every mission. The way you grip that pocket like it's a lifeline." Her hand instinctively brushed the letter. She clenched her fist. He stepped closer, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. "I don't care what ghosts you carry, Ward. I care if they're going to cost lives." She wanted to shout at him, to tell him those ghosts were the only reason she was still breathing, that they weren't weakness but fuel, but her lips refused. And once again, silence held her. That night, as the squad huddled over maps and radio codes, one of the younger soldiers, Lewis, barely 23, leaned closer to her. His voice was low, almost guilty. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She looked up. His eyes were tired but searching, like a boy trying to carry a man's war. "Did you ever think about quitting?" he whispered. She studied him. The question caught her off guard, but his voice carried something human, fragile. "Every day," she admitted softly. He blinked, surprised. "And why don't you?" Her throat tightened. She thought of the letter, of her brother's face, of promises broken and voices lost. Finally, she whispered, "Because someone out there is still waiting." Lewis didn't ask who. He just nodded, relief flickering across his features, as if her words had given him permission to admit his own fear. And for the first time that day, Elena felt less alone. Sleep didn't come. It rarely did before missions. She lay awake on her cot, staring at the ceiling where shadows of rotating fans carved restless patterns. Her fingers traced the edges of the letter again and again, like touching it might give her courage. Outside, boots crunched gravel. Radios whispered. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the horizon, or maybe artillery testing in the desert. She couldn't tell. Her thoughts spiraled back to childhood, to a younger version of her brother running through the wheat fields outside their hometown, to the sound of his laughter, to the way he had always walked ahead of her, shielding her from bullies, from pain, from everything. Now she was the one walking into the storm, for him. Her eyes burned. She blinked it back. Soldiers didn't cry, at least not where anyone could see. But in the dark, when silence pressed like a weight, the tears came anyway. She pressed her face into her pillow, forcing herself to breathe steady. She whispered his name like a prayer, a promise. Morning arrived with a blinding desert sun. Sweat gathered at the nape of her neck as she adjusted her gear. The squad moved with mechanical precision, but their faces betrayed them. One soldier fumbled with his strap twice. Another bit his lip until it bled. Even Lewis, trying to act steady, shook slightly as he checked his weapon. Elena caught these little cracks. She always did, because she carried the same ones inside. And as the trucks rumbled to life, dust kicking up in choking clouds, Elena slid into her seat, the letter pressed against her chest like armor. Operation Eclipse had begun to breathe. And she knew, Whatever waited in Zone 7 wasn't just mission detail. It was personal. Somewhere in that silence, her brother's fate was waiting. Why did the silence inside the truck feel heavier than the desert air outside? Elena sat wedged between two soldiers, her rifle balanced across her knees, the letter still tucked safe inside her vest. The engine growled beneath them, shaking her bones, while the convoy pushed forward into the endless stretch of dirt and horizon. Dust swallowed their windows, and every bump in the road sent helmets clinking softly together. No one spoke, not at first. Silence before a mission was common, ritual almost. Every soldier knew words could break focus, could awaken thoughts best kept buried. But this silence was different. It carried weight. Like everyone sensed that Operation Eclipse wasn't going to end the way it was written in the orders. Elena's fingers brushed the stock of her rifle. Cold metal, reliable. It didn't betray her, didn't ask questions, but her hands still shook faintly. She closed them into fists. Across from her, Lewis stared at the floor, his lips moving silently, counting maybe. She caught fragments of numbers, 1 to 10, then back again. Nerves, always nerves. And on her right, Corporal Ruiz leaned back against the rattling steel wall, his eyes half closed but not asleep. A man who had seen too much, too often. His beard was peppered gray, his voice gravel when he finally spoke. "You ever notice," he muttered, barely audible over the engine, "how missions with names like Eclipse never end clean?" Heads turned, no one replied. Ruiz cracked a tired grin, humorless. "They pick words meant to sound sharp, dangerous, poetic, but all I hear is a curse." Elena studied him. She wanted to disagree. To tell him names didn't matter, only execution did. But a small part of her knew he was right. She remembered the names of past ops that had left ghosts in their wake, each one wrapped in a word meant to sound decisive. Iron Shield, Silent Dagger, Winter Spear. Words written neatly on reports, masking the blood spilled underneath. She wondered what kind of blood Eclipse would demand. Hours blurred. The desert outside never seemed to change, waves of sand, the occasional broken tree, a lone building crumbling in the distance. Heat pressed through the armored plating, sticky and suffocating. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading across brows, dripping down necks. Elena leaned her head back, closing her eyes. But behind her eyelids she saw him again. Her brother. His face at 17, smudged with dirt, stubborn smile cutting through. She saw the day he left for his first deployment, the way he promised her he'd come back, the way she believed him. And then the day the reports came in. Missing. No confirmed sighting. No body. Rumors filled the silence. She never believed them, not until she saw his name written in one of the maps during yesterday's briefing. Zone 7, a ghostly circle over familiar terrain. Her eyes snapped open. She couldn't sleep, not here, not now. By dusk, the convoy halted. The trucks rolled into a narrow valley where jagged rocks rose like broken teeth on either side. Shadows stretched long and heavy, and the air cooled with a sudden bite. The soldiers spilled out, boots crunching gravel, the sound echoing in the hollow space. Elena stepped onto the ground, stretching her stiff legs. She inhaled deeply, dust and oil mixed with the faint scent of sagebrush. She scanned the ridges above. Too many blind spots, too many ways to die here. The commander barked orders: temporary camp, minimal light, no noise after dark. The men moved quickly, practiced, almost mechanical. Tents went up, radios checked, weapons cleaned. Each motion rehearsed through years of habit. Yet beneath the efficiency, Elena felt it again, the current of unease running like an underground river. Lewis crouched near the fire pit, striking stones together. The faint spark died instantly. He tried again. His hands trembled. Elena walked over, crouched beside him, and held out her lighter. "Here," she said softly. He blinked, embarrassed, then accepted it. The flame caught. A tiny fire flickered to life, its glow reflecting in his young eyes. "Thanks," he muttered. She watched the flame dance. "You ever been out this far?" He shook his head. "Closest I got was border patrol last year, but this," he hesitated, lowering his voice, "feels wrong." She wanted to reassure him, to tell him wrong was normal out here. That feeling wrong meant you were paying attention. But she didn't. Instead, she let the fire crackle between them, the silence saying more than comfort could. Later, as the squad sat eating rations in the dim light, conversation began to stir. Stories. Small, fragile threads of humanity they clung to in the void between missions. Ruiz talked about the last letter his daughter had sent him, how she drew pictures at the bottom, stick figures holding hands. "Says I'm the one with the big square head," he chuckled, though his eyes stayed fixed on the dirt. Another soldier, Malik, recounted how he missed the taste of his mother's cooking, how nothing in the world compared to the bread she made. The men teased him, but gently. It was a ritual grounding themselves with memories of things that still made them human. When it came to Elena, they asked, "What about you, Ward? Anyone waiting back home?" She froze, the question lodged in her throat. She could lie, say no one, say a friend maybe, but the image of her brother flooded her uninvited, his face, his warning, that letter burning in her pocket. She lowered her gaze. "Someone," she whispered. The squad nodded, satisfied with the simple answer. But Lewis glanced at her longer, as if he knew it meant more than she'd let on. That night silence returned heavier than before. The fire burned low, throwing faint orange against faces worn thin by years of service. The desert wind whispered, rattling the tent flaps, carrying with it the distant call of some unseen animal. Elena lay on her back, rifle beside her, vest still strapped tight. She couldn't let herself sleep unarmed. Not here, not this close. Her eyes followed the canvas above, tracing every crease, every shadow, and her mind wandered again to the letter. What if it contained the truth she feared most? What if it told her he was gone for good, that all these years of hope were nothing but denial? She reached for it, pulled it free. Her fingers lingered on the edges, trembling. She almost tore it open. Almost. But the sound of footsteps froze her. The commander. He stepped into the faint glow, his expression unreadable. He stood at the edge of her tent, arms crossed, studying her. "You're not sleeping," he said. "Neither are you," she replied. He didn't smile. "We move at dawn, get what rest you can." She wanted to challenge him, to demand why he kept circling her, pressing into her silence, dragging out what she wasn't ready to say. But all she did was nod. As he walked away, she whispered to herself, so faint only the desert heard. Zone 7. At dawn the squad moved again, packs tightened, weapons checked, radios clipped, the fire reduced to ash. The convoy pushed further east, deeper into terrain that felt hostile even without enemies in sight. The rocks closed in tighter, the sky narrowing above, until the road became a throat choking them forward. Elena gripped her rifle, her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that they were being watched. She scanned the ridges, shadows shifting with the rising sun. No movement, nothing visible, but the silence had changed. She looked at Lewis. His jaw was tight, his eyes wide. He felt it too. Then Ruiz cursed under his breath. Something off. The commander lifted his fist. The convoy slowed. Engines growled into uneasy stillness. Everyone listened. Wind, sand scraping metal, the faint creak of gear. And then nothing. Too much nothing. Elena's chest tightened. Because she knew. This was where silence ended. Why did the birds stop singing? Elena noticed it before anyone else. The faint chatter of sparrows that had followed them through the canyon had gone silent. No wings, no sound. Just the wind dragging across stone. Her breath caught. She gripped her rifle tighter, eyes narrowing at the ridgeline above. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Ruiz turned, brow furrowing. "What?" The crack split the morning, sharp, clean, merciless. Glass shattered. A bullet tore through the windshield of the lead truck, spraying shards into the driver's face. He slumped instantly. The vehicle swerved, slammed against the canyon wall, smoke belching from the hood. Contact, contact, voices roared. Chaos erupted. Elena dropped behind the steel plating of her truck as rounds clanged against the armor. Sparks flew. Dust exploded from the dirt road. The air filled with the metallic chorus of gunfire, ricochets, and shouted orders. She sucked in a breath, forced herself to steady. 1 second, 2. Then she rose, rifle pressed to her shoulder, scanning the ridges. Shadows darted between rocks. Figures. Snipers dug into the high ground, muzzle flashes stuttering against the stone. Her finger tightened. She fired. One target dropped, body crumpling down the slope. She pivoted, squeezed again, the recoil punching into her shoulder. Another figure ducked back, disappearing. Her ears rang, her pulse thundered. She shouted over the roar, "Lewis, on my 6." He scrambled into place, his young hands shaking as he raised his rifle. His first shots went wide, scattering rock chips. Elena's voice cut sharp through the chaos. "Breathe, don't rush, one target at a time." He steadied, fired again. This time the bullet found flesh. A cry echoed down the canyon. But the enemy wasn't just above. From the rear, a rocket screamed, slamming into the last truck in the convoy. The explosion ripped the vehicle apart, black smoke curling into the sky. The concussion shook Elena's teeth. Flames licked the wreckage. Screams pierced the crack of gunfire. Her heart seized. She knew some of their men were inside. The commander's voice roared through the comms. "Hold the line. Don't let them box us in." Elena's breath came hard, shallow. She dropped behind cover again, dust sticking to the sweat on her skin. She clutched the letter inside her vest without meaning to, fingers digging into the paper. A habit. A curse. Zone 7. Her brother's face flashed again. Was he out there, watching, trapped? Or was she lying to herself, seeing ghosts where there were none? A cry yanked her back. "Lewis." He was pinned against the side of the truck, bullets slamming into the steel inches from his head. His eyes were wide, wild. He couldn't move. Elena didn't think. She darted from cover, grabbed his vest, yanked him down with her. A round sliced the air where his head had been. He gasped, trembling. "You want to live," she barked, eyes burning into his. He nodded furiously. "Then trust your weapon. Don't freeze. Freezing kills more than bullets." His breath came ragged, but he nodded again. This time when he rose, his shots had focus. Control. Not perfect, but steady enough. Elena covered him, picking off another shadow that leaned too far from cover. She saw the figure's body crumple, roll down the slope, face striking stone. She didn't let herself look longer. The firefight dragged on. Minutes felt like hours. The canyon filled with smoke and dust, the smell of burning fuel mixing with the copper tang of blood. Bodies lay scattered, theirs and the enemy. Elena's shoulder ached from recoil. Her throat was raw from shouting orders she hadn't realized she'd given. And all the while, her mind kept circling back to the same thought. This is only the beginning. Because ambushes never came alone. They were signals, messages. Someone knew they were here. Someone wanted them buried in this canyon. At last, the gunfire thinned. The echoes rolled away into silence. Smoke curled lazily into the pale morning sky. The commander's voice broke through the ringing in her ears. "Cease fire, check your sectors." Elena lowered her rifle slowly, chest heaving. Her hands trembled. She clenched them into fists until the tremor stopped. Around her, soldiers moved cautiously, scanning the ridges for stragglers. Some collapsed against the trucks, exhaustion etched into their faces. Medics rushed to the wounded, their voices sharp and urgent. Lewis slumped beside her, his eyes wide with shock. His hands were smeared with dirt and sweat, but he was alive. She rested a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at first, then met her gaze. "You did good," she said quietly. He swallowed hard, nodding though his lips trembled. She knew he'd replay every second of this day for years. His first real firefight, his first kill, his first brush with death. It marked you forever. But victory didn't feel like victory. The rear truck was gone, a twisted carcass of steel and flame. 4 men lost. Their names wouldn't even be spoken until the mission was over. Just numbers now. Ghosts waiting to be written into a report. Ruiz spat into the dirt, shaking his head. They knew we were coming. This wasn't chance. Elena's jaw tightened. He was right. The enemy had been waiting, prepared, which meant someone had given them a reason to wait. The commander's expression was unreadable as he moved through the survivors, checking weapons, checking faces. He stopped when he reached her. "You held your sector." His voice was flat, but his eyes lingered. She nodded though her throat was dry. She wanted to ask him, to demand if he knew. If Zone 7 was more than just a coincidence, but the word stuck, always stuck. He turned away before she could find her voice. By afternoon, the convoy pushed forward again, slower, wearier. Every shadow on the ridge was an enemy waiting to strike. Every bend in the canyon threatened another ambush. Elena rode in silence, staring at the horizon. Her ears still rang, her muscles ached, but it was her mind that wouldn't quiet. The letter pressed against her chest like a brand. She thought of opening it in the chaos, thought of reading her brother's words right there in the middle of the firestorm. But she couldn't. Not yet, not with so much left unanswered. Her eyes drifted to Louis. He sat across from her, head bowed, whispering something again. She leaned closer, caught the faintest words. "Don't forget me, don't forget me." She realized he wasn't praying, he was begging himself. That night when they stopped to regroup, the canyon stretched endless around them. No campfire this time. Too risky. Just darkness pressing against the soldiers, stars sharp above, silence louder than any gun. Elena sat alone, back against the truck tire, rifle across her lap. She studied the sky. Her thoughts spiraled again to her brother, to the zone marked on the map, to the silence that had begun this mission. She whispered his name into the night, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in months. It tasted strange, heavy on her tongue. For a moment she imagined he answered, just a whisper in the wind. But then nothing. Only silence. And in that silence, Elena realized something she didn't want to admit. The ambush wasn't just a battle, it was a message. And whoever sent it, they knew exactly who she was. The convoy rolled again, but it wasn't the same convoy that had entered the canyon. It was quieter, heavier. Every wheel turned over bodies they couldn't retrieve. Every mile they gained was paid for with silence in the back of the trucks, the absence of voices that had filled them just that morning. Elena sat with her rifle upright against her leg, eyes locked on the horizon, though her thoughts wandered far from the dirt road. She could still smell the burned rubber and scorched flesh from the rear truck. She could still hear the hiss of flames swallowing steel. And beneath it all, she could still feel the letter pressing into her chest like a heartbeat. Zone 7. She couldn't shake it. Ruiz broke the silence first. 4 men gone just like that. His tone was flat, but the weight in it was undeniable. Across from him, Louis looked down at his boots, jaw tight. His fingers twitched against his rifle, restless, as if they couldn't decide whether to grip or let go. He hadn't spoken since the firefight. "Don't say their names yet," Elena muttered, her voice steady though her throat was dry. Ruiz looked at her. "Why not?" She met his gaze. "Because if you say them, they'll feel real, and we're not ready for real yet." Louis flinched. He kept his eyes on the floor. The truck jolted over a rock, throwing them slightly upward before slamming them back down. The noise jarred Elena's chest, but it wasn't enough to break the tension. Nothing was. Hours stretched into a haze of dust and monotony. broken only by the occasional static hiss of the comms. Finally, the convoy stopped in a stretch of broken desert terrain. The commander stepped out first, boots crunching on the gravel, his shadow long in the fading light. He stood like a man carved from stone, unmoving, until the others had gathered. His voice was calm when it came, but that calm was cold. They knew we were coming. The words were like a gunshot, direct, unarguable. Ruiz spat into the dirt. Damn right they did. That ambush wasn't chance, it was placed, timed. Someone handed them our path. The commander's eyes swept over them, unreadable. This mission hasn't changed. We move forward. The target is still intact, but let me make one thing clear. He paused, looked at each of them one by one until his gaze landed on Elena. Loose tongues will kill faster than bullets. Whatever suspicions you're carrying, bury them. We'll root out the truth after the mission. Elena's stomach twisted. She looked away before his eyes could pin her longer. She thought she felt him linger, but maybe it was her guilt playing tricks. That night no fire was lit. The desert was their only blanket, and the stars their only light. Elena sat with her back against a rock, cleaning her rifle with methodical precision. Across the camp, Lewis sat apart from the others, knees pulled tight to his chest, lips moving as if whispering to someone only he could see. She watched him for a long moment, then rose and crossed the sand. "You'll wear a hole in the ground if you keep staring at it," she said quietly. He startled, blinking up at her. I wasn't." "You were." She lowered herself onto the sand beside him. The desert was cool now, the heat of day bleeding away into the vastness of night. Lewis's voice was brittle. "I thought I was ready. I thought training prepared me, but today," he swallowed hard. "Today I wasn't a soldier, I was just a boy trying not to die." Her gaze softened. She let the silence stretch before answering. "You lived, that's the first step. The rest comes slower, some of it never comes at all." He looked at her, eyes wide, searching. "Do you ever get used to it?" Elena hesitated. Her fingers brushed the outline of the letter beneath her vest. "No," she said finally. "You don't get used to it, you just get better at carrying it." Lewis dropped his eyes again. His hands trembled faintly. "Then I'll learn to carry it," he whispered. Much later, when most had succumbed to exhausted sleep, Elena stayed awake. The stars burned sharp above her, but she wasn't looking at them. She was staring at the folded paper she finally pulled from her vest. Her brother's handwriting stared back at her, jagged, uneven, as if he had written in haste. She read it for the 100th time, though the words cut deeper each time. "They keep us in Zone 7. Some don't survive the work. Some are taken at night and never return. I don't know how much longer I'll last. If you ever find this, please remember me as I was." She squeezed her eyes shut, the ink blurred. He was alive when he wrote it. But was he now? Was he a prisoner waiting in the zone their convoy crept toward? Or had he already become one of the nameless bodies buried beneath foreign soil? She pressed the letter to her lips, a silent prayer without words. And still she told no one. The next day bled into heat. The desert sun bore down on steel and skin alike, searing through uniforms, turning helmets into ovens. Dust coated their throats, thick and choking. The convoy moved slowly, each mile dragging under suspicion and fatigue. Every soldier scanned the ridges. Every rock was a sniper, every shadow a trap. And through it all, Elena's silence grew heavier. By late afternoon, a scout returned with word of movement ahead. Not enemy movement, something else. When the convoy crested the next ridge, they saw it. A small village, barely more than a cluster of mud brick homes and a scattering of livestock. Children darted between the walls. Women carried buckets of water, their eyes sharp and wary as they spotted the convoy approaching. The trucks rolled to a halt at the edge of the village. The commander raised a fist, signaling silence. "Keep your weapons down," he ordered. "We don't want to spook them. But as Elena looked out over the village, her pulse quickened. Because beyond the homes, beyond the well, she saw fences, barbed wire glinting in the sun, guard towers crumbling but still standing. A camp. Her throat closed. Zone 7. The villagers watched silently as the soldiers dismounted. Their eyes were unreadable, some fearful, some hostile, some resigned. Elena's boots crunched on the dry earth as she followed the commander toward the camp's rusted gates. The air smelled faintly of ash. She saw scorched marks on the ground, as if fires had burned recently. The closer she drew, the harder her chest tightened. She could almost hear her brother's voice, could almost see his face pressed against those wires. The commander paused at the gate, studying the broken padlock that hung from it. He pushed the gate open with a creak. Inside, the camp lay silent, empty. Bunkhouses stood abandoned, their doors hanging open. The wind whistled through the broken wood. Chains clinked faintly against posts, though no prisoners remained. Elena's heart sank. She moved through the camp like a ghost, eyes darting from shack to shack, searching. She found scraps of clothing, scattered tools, a cracked bowl with dried remnants of food. But no people. Not even bodies. Only absence. Behind her, Ruiz muttered, "They cleared this place. Not long ago either." Lewis's voice cracked. "Where did they take them?" The commander's face was stone. "Further east, they're moving them, that's all we need to know." But Elena's legs gave out before she realized. She sank onto the dirt, fists pressing into the ground. Too late. Always too late. Her brother had been here. She could feel it. She could almost smell the faint trace of sweat, fear, and desperation that lingered in the wood. But he was gone now, moved or worse. And she was powerless to follow without exposing herself. Her silence screamed louder than any gunfire. That night, as the unit camped on the edge of the village, Elena sat apart from the others. Lewis approached cautiously, hesitating before lowering himself beside her. He didn't speak at first, just waited. Finally, he asked quietly, "Who are you really fighting for?" The words pierced her. She turned to him sharply, searching his face for suspicion, but his eyes weren't accusing. They were simply curious. She looked away, toward the horizon where the barbed wire glinted under the moonlight. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know anymore." But deep inside she knew. And the closer they moved toward Zone 7, the heavier the truth would become. What does silence mean when it lingers too long? That question haunted Elena as the convoy pulled away from the abandoned camp. No one spoke much. The discovery of the empty barracks, the rusted wire, the chains still swaying, it sat on all of them like a curse. Every soldier knew what it meant. The enemy was always one step ahead. Someone was feeding them information. But no one dared say it aloud. "Not yet." Lewis broke first. "They knew we were coming," he said under his breath, voice raw. Ruiz snapped his head toward him. "Keep your damn mouth shut." "It's true," Lewis's voice cracked. "We drive into an ambush, then we arrive at a camp that's been cleared hours before we get there. How many coincidences do you want me to swallow?" Ruiz leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You're green. You don't know how this works yet. Sometimes intel is old. Sometimes it's bad luck. But I'll tell you one thing, running your mouth about traitors will get us all killed faster than anything else." Lewis shrank back, though his fist stayed clenched. He wasn't convinced. Elena said nothing. She stared out the back of the truck, watching the dust plume in their wake. Her silence was its own shield, but also its own prison. Because inside, she knew Lewis was right. The enemy wasn't just waiting for them. They were moving ahead of them, clearing sights, covering tracks, as if they were reading the unit's map in real time. And she carried the one secret that might explain why. That night, the commander called them together. The village had offered them a temporary outpost, a place to rest, regroup, and push forward again at first light. They gathered in the largest structure, a hall built of crumbling stone. A lantern flickered on a crate in the center, shadows climbing the walls like restless spirits. The commander's face looked older in the light, every wrinkle deeper, every scar darker. "We continue east," he said flatly. "The target remains the same." No one replied. Then Ruiz spoke, voice low but firm. "Sir, with respect, someone's bleeding our route. Every move we make, they're ready. If we don't deal with that, it doesn't matter how far east we go. We're just walking corpses." The commander's jaw flexed. His eyes narrowed, scanning the circle of soldiers. When he finally spoke, it was like stone grinding against stone. "Do you want me to name a traitor?" he asked. The question froze the air. No one answered. Even Ruiz's breath seemed to catch. The commander leaned forward. "Because I will not. Not until proof stares me in the face. Until then you will carry yourselves as one unit, one heartbeat, one silence." His words slammed like a gavel. And yet they left a crack wide enough for fear to crawl through. Later, Elena sat alone outside the hall, watching the desert stretch infinite under the moonlight. Lewis approached quietly. His shadow fell long beside her. "You think he knows?" Lewis whispered. Her pulse jumped. "Knows what?" "That someone's feeding them." His voice trembled. Maybe even one of us." Elena forced her face to stay still. She wanted to tell him the truth, wanted to pour the letter into his hands and say, "This is why. This is what they don't know." But she couldn't. If she did, suspicion would shift, and suspicion was fire. It burned whoever it touched. So she lied. "No," she said softly. "He doesn't know, he doesn't want to know, that's the difference." Lewis studied her in silence. Then slowly he nodded. But his eyes lingered too long, as if they saw something she hadn't meant to reveal. Morning brought more heat, more dust, more silence. The convoy crept eastward, crawling through narrow valleys and broken ridges. Birds of prey circled high overhead, waiting patient. Every soldier was taut as wire. Even Ruiz, who usually filled silence with sarcasm, kept his jaw locked shut. Elena's gaze flicked constantly from ridge to ridge. She tried to drown the pounding in her head by focusing on detail, the glint of a stone, the shift of sand, the shadow of a ridge line. But all she saw was absence. The absence of her brother in that camp, the absence of trust in her unit, the absence of her own voice. It came to a head 3 days later. The convoy stopped for fuel and rest near a dry riverbed, its cracked earth stretching like scars across the land. Soldiers dismounted, rifles slung low, exhaustion etched into every movement. Lewis approached Elena again, his face pale, sweat streaking his temples. "They're saying things," he murmured. She stiffened. "Who?" "Ruiz, a couple of the others, they think," he hesitated. "They think maybe it's you." The words sliced through her like shrapnel. "Me?" Her voice was low but sharp. Lewis's gaze darted away. "You don't talk much. You go off alone. You knew about that ridge before anyone else did." Elena's heart hammered. She remembered her slip in the canyon, the instinct that had saved them seconds before the ambush. She hadn't realized how it had looked. Now it looked like foresight. Now it looked like betrayal. She forced her voice steady. "And do you think it's me?" Lewis met her eyes. His own wavered, torn between fear and loyalty. "No," he said finally. "I don't, but they do, and that's dangerous." Her breath came shallow. She turned her face away, staring at the dry earth cracking under the sun. Dangerous didn't begin to cover it. That evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Ruiz cornered her. He stepped into her path, blocking the way back to the truck. His eyes were narrowed slits, his voice low but venomous. "You've been quiet since day one, watching, waiting. You think no one notices, but I do." Elena met his stare, unflinching. "You're imagining ghosts." Am I? He leaned closer, his breath hot, foul with dust and suspicion. We bleed in the canyon. We find an empty camp. And somehow you're always 2 steps ahead. Maybe you're not the one pulling the trigger, but maybe you're the reason bullets find us. Her hand twitched near her rifle, but she didn't move. Not yet. You want to accuse me, she said coldly. Do it in front of the commander, otherwise shut your mouth. Ruiz's sneer twisted. The commander won't see what's in front of him, but I do, and if you step wrong again, I won't wait for his permission. He brushed past her, shoulder hard against hers. Her pulse thundered in her throat. The crack had widened, and she was standing on the edge. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The desert pressed in around her like a cage. Every sound, the shuffle of boots, the click of a rifle's safety, was amplified until it threatened to split her skull. She pulled out the letter again, fingers trembling. Her brother's words blurred in the dim light, but she could still feel them, sharp as knives. If you ever find this, please, remember me as I was. She clenched the paper until it crumpled. How much longer could she hold this silence? How much longer before it destroyed her? The following morning, they were ambushed again. Not with bombs this time, but with silence. The convoy entered a narrow gorge. High cliffs towered above them, jagged teeth of stone. The lead truck slowed, then stopped. Something was wrong. No sound, no wind, no birds. Just silence. Elena felt it first, the prickle on the back of her neck. Her hand went to her rifle. And then movement. Figures on the cliffs, rifles flashing in the sun. The trap snapped shut. Gunfire tore the gorge apart. The gorge erupted in fire. Stone walls amplified every shot until the air itself seemed to tear apart. Bullets ricocheted, sparks spitting against rock. The convoy was trapped in a funnel of death. Elena dove behind the wheel arch of the truck, rifle snapping to her shoulder. Her first burst cut a figure from the ridge, sending him tumbling, arms flailing against the sky before he vanished into dust below. Screams cut through static. Men fell. The ground shook as one of the trucks lurched sideways, its tire shredded, smoke curling upward. There was no time to think, only to fight. Lewis slid in beside her, face white as chalk, eyes wide but locked on his rifle sights. He fired upward, teeth bared like an animal cornered. "They're everywhere," he shouted, voice breaking in the chaos. Elena's pulse pounded. She fired again, the recoil kicking hard into her shoulder. The smell of cordite burned her throat. Her ears rang until sound became muffled, distant, as if she were fighting inside a dream. But this was no dream. The man who collapsed near the truck wasn't dreamlike. His blood was real. His gasps were wet, bubbling from a punctured lung. Elena grit her teeth and fired again. The commander's voice cut through the storm, sharp as a whip. "Flank left, Ruiz with me." Orders snapped. Men moved. But even orders felt thin against the weight of fire raining from above. Elena crawled forward, pulling Lewis with her toward the cover of boulders. Every inch felt stolen, every breath borrowed. A mortar shell exploded against the far ridge, raining rock shards like knives. A scream followed, then silence. Too much silence. Elena risked a glance. Ruiz was down. His body sprawled unnaturally, half buried in dust. The commander shouted his name, but Ruiz did not move. Rage flared in the commander's voice. Suppressive fire, move, move. The unit surged, but the gorge was narrow, escape choked by fire. Men who ran fell. Men who hid were pinned. Elena pressed her back against stone, chest heaving. Dust coated her tongue. She blinked, sweat from her eyes, mind racing. They couldn't win by waiting. Not here, not trapped. She turned to Lewis, who was reloading with trembling hands. "We have to climb." His eyes widened. "Climb? They'll cut us down before we're halfway up." "Not if they're busy with someone else." Her voice was steel, though inside she felt it crack. Lewis stared. He saw her plan before she said it. No, no, Elena, you'll die. Her jaw tightened. She glanced at Ruiz's lifeless form, then at the commander still barking orders through smoke and chaos. We'll all die if someone doesn't. She moved before he could argue. Slinging her rifle, she scrambled up the jagged rock, fingers clawing at stone, boots slipping on dust. Bullets whined past her, biting chips of stone from the cliffside. Her lungs burned, her arms shook, but she climbed higher until her fingers hooked an edge. She hauled herself over. The enemy hadn't expected her. They were focused downward, rifles pinned on the convoy below. Elena rose behind them, rifle leveled. The first man never saw her. The second turned too late. Her shots cracked sharp in the thin air, and suddenly the ridge wasn't theirs anymore. The enemy faltered. Their fire wavered. Soldiers below surged forward, seizing the moment. The commander's voice roared, pulling the unit like a thread through a needle. Push, push through. The convoy lurched alive again, trucks grinding forward, men dragging the wounded into the beds. Elena fired until her rifle clicked empty. Then she swung it like a club, knocking one man backward off the ridge, his scream swallowed by the gorge. But there were too many. Rough hands seized her. She fought teeth bared, elbows slamming into ribs, but they pinned her against the stone. A rifle barrel pressed to her temple. Time slowed. She could hear her heartbeat louder than gunfire, could feel sweat sting her eyes, taste the metallic tang of blood in her mouth. And beneath it all, the folded letter still in her vest, her brother's words like a ghost whispering against her chest. Zone 7. If she died here, no one would ever know. No one would ever find him. Her silence would be his grave. A shot rang, but it wasn't aimed at her. The man holding her stiffened, eyes wide, before crumpling at her feet. Behind him, rifle smoking, stood Lewis. He had climbed after her, somehow, against every instinct, against every fear he had followed. His hands shook, but his eyes burned with something fierce. Move, he shouted. Together, they cleared the ridge, bullets and screams blending into chaos, until the last figures fled into the rocks. And then, sudden as it had begun, silence fell. The gorge was still. Smoke hung heavy. The ground was littered with bodies, enemy and their own alike. The convoy crawled forward again, dragging its wounds with it. Elena staggered down from the ridge, Lewis close behind. The commander met them at the base, his face carved from stone. "You disobeyed," he said flatly. Elena met his eyes, chest still heaving. "I did what had to be done." The silence stretched. Finally, he nodded once, "Then keep doing it." He turned away before she could answer. That night the unit buried Ruiz. No words were spoken, no prayers offered, just a shallow grave carved into unforgiving earth and the weight of silence pressing down on every soldier's shoulders. Lewis stood beside Elena, his face pale in the moonlight. His voice was raw when he finally spoke. "You saved us." Elena shook her head. "We saved each other." He studied her, eyes flicking to the faint outline of the folded paper pressing through her vest. He didn't ask, not yet, but she saw the question in his gaze. And for the first time, she feared the silence more than the bullets. When sleep finally came, it brought no peace. Elena dreamed of her brother. She saw him standing behind the barbed wire of the empty camp, reaching for her through rusted steel. His lips moved, but no sound came, only silence. And then the silence broke, not with words, but with a command. Not his voice. The commander. "Bury it, bury the truth." She woke with a start, sweat cold against her skin. The desert stretched endless and merciless around her. And for the first time, she wondered if silence wasn't just survival. Maybe it was surrender. The desert was quiet again, too quiet. The convoy rolled like a wounded beast across endless dunes, its engines growling low, its wheels dragging scars across the earth. Every soldier felt it, the weight of the gorge still clinging to them. The silence wasn't victory. It was grief. Elena rode in the back of one of the trucks, her rifle resting across her lap. Dust clung to her skin, the fine grit grinding against her sweat-soaked collar. The bodies they couldn't bury rode with them, shrouded in tarps, their stillness louder than any gunfire. No one spoke. The only sound was the low rumble of the engine, the occasional cough of smoke, and the hollow groan of suspension beneath their weight. Lewis sat across from her, elbows on his knees, head bent forward. His hands worked restlessly over the stock of his rifle, again and again, as if the motion kept him anchored. Every now and then his eyes flicked to Elena, quick, searching. She pretended not to notice, but she felt it, the weight of his questions pressing harder every day. At her chest, under her vest, the letter burned like a brand. Zone 7. She hadn't dared look at it since the gorge. Not once. Not while eyes were everywhere. Not while silence was her only shield. That night they stopped in the ruins of an abandoned village, half-collapsed mud walls, shattered windows staring like hollow eyes. The men moved like ghosts, too tired to speak, too tired to grieve. They built no fire. They ate their rations cold. And when darkness settled, they collapsed into uneasy sleep, rifles clutched close. Elena sat apart, back against a broken wall. She tried to close her eyes, but every time she did, Ruiz's lifeless stare returned. The echo of the gorge thundered in her skull. She heard footsteps, soft, familiar. Lewis lowered himself beside her, his face shadowed by moonlight. For a long time he said nothing, just sat there, silence between them. Finally his voice broke, quiet, fragile. "I keep hearing it." Elena turned to him. "The gorge," he whispered, his jaw trembled. "The way the rock shook, the way he fell, Ruiz, I can't stop seeing it." She swallowed, her throat felt tight. He pressed his palms over his eyes. "And I keep asking myself, why you?" The words cut sharp. She stiffened. "What do you mean?" Lewis dropped his hands, eyes locking on hers. "Why did you climb? Why risk everything? You knew it would get you killed." Her silence was answer enough. He leaned closer, his whisper almost a plea. "You were carrying something before that ambush, something more than fear. I saw it. I still see it." His eyes flicked to her vest, the faint outline of the paper pressing through. The letter. Her pulse spiked. She shifted slightly, angling her body, hiding it from view. "You're imagining things," she said flatly. But his gaze didn't waver. Before he could press further, the commander's voice cut through the ruins. "Everyone up." Lewis flinched. Elena stood quickly, glad for the interruption. The men gathered in the shadow of the half-collapsed mosque. The commander's silhouette towered over them, rigid and unyielding. His voice was cold iron. "We lost Ruiz. We buried him in soil that will never remember his name. But we are not done. Our orders remain. We reach the extraction zone in 3 days. No delays, no questions." He scanned their faces. His eyes lingered on Elena a moment longer, too long. She felt it like a blade against her throat. Then he continued. "From this point, anyone who hesitates, anyone who falters endangers us all, and I will not allow it." The message was clear: obey, or be buried beside Ruiz. The next day the desert stretched merciless under the sun. Their water was thinning, their rations lighter. The men's boots dragged, their eyes grew hollow. By midday, tension snapped. A soldier named Carter broke ranks, stumbling, falling to his knees. His lips cracked, voice hoarse. I can't go on." The commander strode to him, jaw tight. "On your feet." Carter shook his head, shoulders trembling. "I'm done. We're marching to nowhere. We're already dead." The commander's pistol flashed before anyone could blink. The shot echoed across the desert, rolling like thunder. Carter collapsed, his lifeless body sprawled in the sand. No one spoke, no one moved. The commander holstered his weapon, eyes sweeping the unit. This is what hesitation costs. He turned and walked on. One by one the others followed. No words, no grief, just silence. But silence was no longer safety. It was fear. Elena felt it in every step, saw it in the way men avoided each other's eyes, in the way Lewis's jaw clenched tighter each day. That night when the unit huddled in another ruin, Lewis finally broke. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her aside into the shadows of a crumbling wall. His voice was sharp, desperate. This isn't survival anymore, this is madness. His eyes burned. You know something. You've been hiding something since before the gorge, and if you don't tell me, Elena, we'll all end up like Carter. Her chest heaved. She wanted to speak, wanted to unload the truth pressing against her ribs. Zone 7, her brother, the silence that could kill him. But the commander's shadow loomed larger than her own fear. Her lips parted and then closed. Her silence was answer enough. Lewis stepped back, pain flickering in his eyes. He shook his head slowly. Then you're no different than him. He turned and walked away, leaving her in the dark with her silence. Sleep didn't come. Elena sat awake, staring at the folded letter pressed against her chest. Her fingers itched to open it, to read her brother's words again, to remind herself why she endured this silence. But every time she reached for it, she saw Ruiz's grave, Carter's lifeless body in the sand, and the commander's cold eyes, always watching. She pressed the paper harder against her chest. Her silence was all she had left. But for how long? The desert winds whispered as dawn bled across the horizon. The convoy moved again. But something had changed. The silence no longer held them together. It was tearing them apart. The sun was merciless. It bled across the horizon like fire, baking the desert into a shimmering mirage. The convoy trudged forward, a line of ghosts dragging their shadows behind them. Boots scraped sand. Breath rasped dry. Not a word passed between them. But silence was no longer safety. It was the sound of a unit breaking. Elena walked near the rear, rifle heavy in her hands. Every step was agony. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw, her body screaming for rest. Yet her mind carried a heavier burden. Zone 7, the letter, her brother. She had guarded the secret like a flame in the wind, but now it was eating her alive. And Lewis, the one man who once looked at her with quiet faith, now wouldn't even meet her eyes. That night the desert gave them no shelter. They huddled in a shallow ravine, the wind howling above like some endless dirge. No fire, no food, just the gnaw of hunger and the weight of shadows. The commander paced among them, his figure a black silhouette against the stars. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence was a threat sharpened to a blade. Elena sat with her back to the cold earth, knees pulled close. She watched Lewis from across the camp. His face was hollow, eyes distant, as if he were already gone. Her hand drifted to her chest, to the folded paper, to the words she hadn't dared speak. Her silence had once been armor, now it was chains. Near dawn, a whisper woke her. Elena. Her eyes snapped open. Lewis crouched beside her, his face tight with urgency. We can't keep following him, he hissed. His glance flicked toward the commander. He's leading us to death. You know it, I know it. She sat up slowly. And what would you have us do? Lewis's jaw clenched. Break off, head north, find our own way to extraction. That's desert suicide. His eyes burned. Better than execution. Elena said nothing. Lewis leaned closer. His voice trembled now. Please, if there's something you're hiding, something that explains why you keep following him, I need to know, before I do something I can't take back. Her lips parted. The words rose, desperate to break free. Zone 7, her brother, the truth. But the commander's shadow loomed, his figure standing rigid at the edge of camp, scanning the horizon. Watching, always watching. The words died in her throat. Lewis's shoulders sagged. He shook his head slowly, pain carving into his face. Then you've already chosen. He rose and walked away, leaving her with silence once more. When morning came, it began with blood. A shot rang out across the ravine. The soldiers jolted awake, rifles raised, eyes wild. The commander stood at the edge of camp, his pistol smoking, a man's lifeless body at his feet. Another soldier gone. Deserter, the commander said coldly. His eyes swept the unit, daring them to question. Anyone else? The silence was suffocating. One by one, the men lowered their rifles. No one spoke, no one moved. Elena's stomach twisted. The commander's shadow stretched longer than the dawn. The march continued. Days blurred into each other. Hunger gnawed deeper. Water thinned to drops. Men staggered, fell, rose again only through fear. By the third night, Lewis couldn't bear it anymore. He snapped. They had stopped in another barren hollow, the stars wheeling cold above them. The commander gave his nightly command, no fire, no questions, no hesitation. And Lewis stood. His voice cracked the silence. This isn't leadership, this is slaughter. The commander froze. Slowly he turned. His eyes gleamed with something feral. Repeat that. Lewis's rifle was in his hands now, trembling. You've killed more of us than the enemy. You're not saving us. You're burying us. The air went still. Every soldier held his breath. The commander's lips curved into something cruel. Then bury yourself first. His pistol flashed. But the shot never landed. Because Elena moved. Her rifle was up before she thought. The crack split the night. The commander staggered, shock flashing across his face. Then he fell. Silence thundered louder than the gunfire. Every soldier froze. Their eyes snapped to Elena, wide, unblinking. Her chest heaved. Her hands trembled on the rifle. The commander's body lay in the sand, still, blood soaking into the earth. She had broken the silence. But it wasn't enough. Because now all eyes demanded answers. Lewis stared at her, disbelief and something deeper flickering across his face. Why, Elena? His voice was hoarse. Why now? Why not before? She swallowed hard. Her hand rose to her chest, trembling, pulling out the folded paper. She opened it slowly. Her voice cracked as she read, the words spilling into the desert night. My brother, Zone 7, they took him. This mission, it wasn't just orders. It was leverage. If I stayed silent, if I obeyed, they promised. Her voice broke. Tears burned her eyes. They promised he'd live. The men were still. The desert held its breath. Lewis's gaze softened, the pain in his eyes shifting into something else. Understanding. But it was too late. Because silence had already cost too much. The men buried the commander in shallow sand, no prayers spoken. His shadow lingered, but his reign of silence was over. The unit turned to Elena now. She hadn't wanted command, but it had found her. Her voice trembled, but it carried. We move north together, no more silence, no more fear. For the first time in weeks, heads lifted, eyes met. The men stood not as ghosts, but as soldiers again. And Lewis, he stood beside her. Not in silence, but in faith. The march north was brutal. The desert fought them every step, but something had changed. They spoke. Quietly at first. Broken words, muttered regrets, fragments of stories. But slowly the silence cracked. One soldier spoke of a daughter he hadn't seen in years. Another of a farm he hoped still stood. Their words carried them farther than silence ever had. And Elena, she listened. She carried their voices like precious water. Her own voice returned piece by piece, not as orders, not as secrets, but as truths. She spoke of her brother, of the letter, of the weight of silence. and for the first time she felt lighter. They reached extraction on the 7th day. The choppers thundered low, whipping sand into storms. Soldiers stumbled aboard, exhausted, hollow-eyed but alive. Elena climbed last, her rifle slung across her shoulder, her gaze lingering on the endless desert. The silence still stretched across the horizon, but it was different now. Not fear, not chains. It was dignity. Lewis touched her arm gently. His voice was low. You kept us alive, even if it broke you. She met his eyes. For a long moment no words passed, just silence. But this silence said everything. As the helicopter lifted, the desert fell away beneath them. The unit sat in weary quiet, the wind roaring around them. Some closed their eyes, some stared into nothing. Elena pressed the folded letter to her chest one last time. Her brother's fate remained unknown, but her silence had ended. And in that ending, something new began. The narrator's voice would soften here, fatting like the wind. Sometimes silence destroys, sometimes it protects, but the truest silence is not the absence of words. It is the weight of dignity, of sacrifice, of love too deep to speak. A pause. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The screen would fade to black on Elena's face, eyes steady, scars deep, silence unbroken yet transformed. A final image. A silence that lingers,